Hello and welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, The Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops, a former D1 Hooper and current teacher, husband, and father of 3 amazing kids.
I'm Omari Stracko for the second, Pistons beat writer for Detroit Free Press.
And of course, we're always blessed to be joined by our producer, Wes Davenport, who you guys see on the screen if you're watching live or later on YouTube. Again, if you're on YouTube, hit that like button. That helps share the episode and get us out to more people. Hit the subscribe button. If you're on Apple, Spotify, whatever, same thing. Leave us a 5-star rating review. All of those things to continue to help the Pistons Pulse grow. Obviously, we were scheduled to record on Tuesday night. Omari can explain what happened there real quick. And we are coming to you first thing Wednesday morning. I'm sure my wife is hating me right now. It is 6:30 where I'm at. I'm always up this early, get a workout in, all of that. She gets up a little bit later and then she gets the kids ready for school, all of that stuff. But I'm cutting about 15 minutes out of her sleep time because she's right across the hall from me, Omari. So like right now, even though the doors are closed, I'm sure she's just annoyed as heck with me that she can't get some more sleep in. So how was your night, man? Like you're texting Wes and I'm on a flight. I'm not on a flight. I'm getting a different flight. At one point, we talked about recording with you in the airport, but it sounds like you made it to Atlanta.
I did make it to Atlanta. Well, last night, it's funny. I guess they saved all the travel issues for the end of the season because that was the first time I dealt with that many delays. But it was just one of those things where you board the plane, planes having issues. We sit on the tarmac for an hour. We deboard. They're like, this could be a while. Like there's no clarity. They pushed the board time to 6:30. We're supposed to leave at 4:30, so we're 2 hours past. And there's just all this uncertainty. So I'm like, you know what? I'm just switch to this 9-10 p.m. flight. And we were going to record the pod. We were supposed to do 8 p.m. last night. So, we were just going to move it up at 7 and just knock it out.
Do it there in the airport.
And I'm in line trying to figure my situation out, still because my luggage is on the original flight, even though I pushed it back a few hours. And then all of a sudden you hear the announcement on the intercom. Yeah, we're boarding flight 1467 or whatever it was. So now I have to get back on my original flight because I tried to scan my original boarding pass and they were like, well, you switched flights, so you have to go back to customer service to get back on the original flight. And
man.
And I'm like, but my luggage is already on there. And on top of that, my seat is still on the original flight because nobody could have taken my seat because the flight got delayed. So the people who were on standby have already gone home. And they still made me go back and have to adjust it. It was just this back and forth thing for like 2 hours trying to figure out what I was doing. But long story short, it just got to the point where I was like, you know what, let's just record in the morning because I don't know when I'm going to get to the hotel. So let's just push it back and make it easier for everybody. So this is our earliest recording in a while. I feel like we had gotten to a pretty good flow of doing evening recordings. And with a couple weeks left of the season, ideally this will be the last time we actually record this early for a little bit. So I guess we'll see.
I don't mind the mornings, and maybe like Will J popped in. Always appreciate Will. He pops in just to say what's up, and then that he'll listen later. So we appreciate you. Maybe some people who aren't able to watch in the evenings live, maybe they're getting a chance here in the mornings. I know people are commuting to work and getting started with their day and all of that. Maybe people already have, but maybe we get a few people in here that don't always get to watch live. So this is an all mailbag episode. We got a bunch of questions already from Twitter. We'll get to as many as we can. If you're watching live, put it in the comments. Wes will be following the chat. He'll start. He already has one starred here that we'll put in as we go throughout the episode. So let's get to it, guys. We do have a little bit of a heart out because I do have to become a teacher here fairly soon. And I can't be late for that, especially live on YouTube. That would not look good. So we have a little bit of a heart out. We'll get to as many as we can. If there's some we really like, Omari, we'll star him and we'll bring him back next week or something. Content's going to be a little interesting coming up at the end of the season. So without further ado, Wes of the Detroit Bad Boys podcast, The Pin Down, which you guys should be watching on YouTube Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, kind of depends on the evening, but him and Blake Silverman always doing live stuff over there. So make sure you're watching that, but he's going to come in, he's going to play host and lead us through this episode.
Yeah, all right. So here's our first one, guys. Do either of you get a sense that Cade Cunningham could force his way out of Detroit if things go poorly again next season? This is from Fueled by Motown on Twitter.
Omari, you probably have a little better perspective on this. I mean, I have my thoughts, but I'll let you start if you've heard any rumblings or whispers.
No doubt. I would just add off and say that the precedent for guys forcing their ways off of teams like this early into their careers, especially first round picks, is just extremely slim. I mean, you look at the last however many first round picks, of course, things didn't really work out between Ayton and the Phoenix Suns, but a lot of that was just them not necessarily wanting to extend him, give him the max extension immediately, and that's where that relationship kind of soured. I don't expect the Pistons will have maybe that brutal of a negotiation with Cade, because I think Cade's probably been a bit better than Ayton has through the stage in their career. But beyond that, I mean, you look at Anthony Edwards, he's still in Minnesota. I know that they're good now, but they weren't for a bit. Zion is still in New Orleans. Obviously, Markelle Fultz, Ben Simmons, those guys got hurt, so it's not quite the same scenario. But Ben Simmons still lasted in Philly for a long time before they traded him, right? Karl Anthony Towns still in Minnesota. The precedent for first-round picks forcing their way out after year 4 is just not really there, especially once he gets his money. It's just what leverage do you have at that point to really force your way out? You haven't been an all-star. You don't really have the accolades that guys who force their ways out typically have, which, of course, part of that's because the Pistons haven't been good. So, maybe there's some sense of, well, if you're on a 16, 17 win team, then, that's what's going to block you from those accolades. Hey, we're getting Bryce's kids on this morning. Let's go. This is a special time. We're going to have to do more mornings if Bryce's kids are going to come on. We need that energy late in the season.
He said hello, but I had it muted, and I was like, but they can't hear you. Just wave. And he's just hanging out right now, just chilling, waiting for breakfast. So sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
Just chilling. No, it's all good. But long story short, it's just the precedent of guys doing that early into their career is just not really there. So I understand the fear just from the standpoint of they won 17 games last year. They're probably going to win fewer than that this year. Like, that worry. But historically, that precedent is not really there. Typically, guys need a lot more personal accomplishment before they get to the point to where they can start swinging their weight around a bit. And I would still think the Pistons are a few years away from having any real issues as far as that. Now, behind the scenes, could I see Cade in this camp, maybe putting more pressure on the organization to make win-now moves? I mean, I could absolutely see that, right? The team's not where it needs to be. So I could see a scenario like that. But for it to get to the point where he's forcing his way out, I just don't think it's there yet. Historically, just based on what I've heard, I don't think that's anything the Pistons need to worry about for at least the next year.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I assume they give him the max of whatever they can this summer. Some people will not agree with that. I'm always a little bit surprised, even just in our comments when we're recording live, Twitter, the people that kind of are not fans. I don't want to say not fans of Cade, but just don't kind of see that upside. Even if he doesn't end up being a number one, usually you have 2 max contract guys on a good team. So even if you give him the max rookie extension, whatever that is, there's still going to be money there to bring in somebody better than him if you think you need somebody that's going to be better than him. So I think they're going to give him his money. In my opinion, I've kind of said this quietly. I think this organization is hitched to Monty Williams and Cade Cunningham. Those are the 2 guys that I think are mainstays, at least in the short term. I know a lot of people want Monty fired this offseason. I don't think that's happening. I think this is, and I tend to feel like from an outsider's perspective, I've only been at 1 game all year. So it's not like I've been around the team at all, but that those 2 get along pretty well. They seem to be somewhat on the same page. Monty lets Cade do his thing at the end of the games, those type of things. So I think what you said is more likely what's to happen, Omari, in terms of maybe Cade behind the scenes starts to push this organization into putting the players around him that he wants and building the roster out the way he wants and those type of things. My feeling is this thing is going to kind of go as far as Monty and Cade take it moving forward. Now, 2 years from now, if they're still not winning, if they haven't spaced the floor with shooters, if he doesn't have, the players around him he wants, now he's got his money in his contract. That's when it could happen. I don't think it's going to happen in the meantime. We spent about 5 minutes on this, Wes. We better get to the next one. We're not going to get to very many of these questions. So let's go ahead and get to the next one.
All right, this next one, I'm going to ask it to you first, Bryce, but we actually got this same question essentially twice. So this is Afra, and then also Keith Black Trudeau, friend of the show, also mentioned it on Twitter. But if they get the first round pick in this year's draft, should the Pistons strongly consider trading back with a team like the Thunder or the Blazers? And then Keith asked essentially the same thing.
Yeah, so real quick, shout out to Afra. He, over on the Motor City Hoops Substack, he put out an article. Like, this isn't why I started the Substack. Like, I just started it because I was making these game notes, and I'm like, hey, I'm going to put these out for people to look at if they want, whatever. It's grown a little bit, not a lot, but he emailed me and was like, hey, I would like to write some articles. We had these conversations, and he put an article out. So it was why the Pistons should consider trading back. So you can check that out on the Motor City Hoops Substack. But listen, I think this is a really decent idea. Wes, you and I have talked about this. One of these teams have to want to do this, though. Like, that's the thing, is who is the player these guys pinpoint they want to go get? Now, if I can trade back and get, let's say, Dalton Connect and, maybe 2 wings, Omari, or if you guys think you want to add a big, right? Like, maybe, I don't know where these picks exactly land, but if it's mid first round or whatever, like if you get Connect and Klingon or Edie and those guys come in and your backup 5 men or something like that, I'm for that. Like, I just don't think there's this can't miss prospect in this class where I would rather take 2 bites at the apple. I know that's 2 young players you're bringing in, but Connect is 22, 20. There's some older players higher in this draft, Omari. So I would definitely consider this. Although I will say, I've been one that said, how many young guys can you bring in and find spots for? So that would be the caveat is, like, if you bring in 2 young guys, Omari, now how many vets are you going to be able to put into the roster? Because you have 2 more guys you have to prioritize. So that's the twist on this in terms of that.
Yeah, the thing is, I don't think the Pistons are looking at this offseason like we need to get younger. Kind of like how Bryce said toward the end. They definitely want to make a push and improve pretty substantially next season. You have all this cap space and this and that. You have all these avenues to improve. So in my mind, if they're trading the pick, I would think they're probably trading out of it entirely rather than trying to get 2 bites at the apple in a draft that nobody really seems that thrilled about. With that said, you may have a team that, like Sarr is their guy. Like, they're going to try to get Sarr at all costs, or Reese Shea or somebody else. And maybe in that scenario, trade makes more sense. But, I don't know if the Pistons do that trade for like 2 first-round picks. Maybe you get 1 first-round pick and then a guy who can actually help you win games now. I just don't necessarily see them wanting to add, 2 more guys between the age of 19 and 22, after a season like this, where it's just pretty clear you needed more, like, win now firepower, right? That was one of the big issues this season. So in this draft, I just don't know necessarily who those 2 guys are to where you're like, well, we have the 2nd overall pick, but we're going to settle for 7 and 11, in a draft where there's probably only 4 or 5 guys that you really, really like. So, I mean, again, like, all this comes down to where, teams fall in the lottery. It's kind of hard for me to do hypotheticals just because we don't know where these picks are going to fall. Pistons got the first pick. They can fall down to 5 again. Even in a draft like this, there's a pretty big difference between 1 and 5. But to me, I would think that they would want to get a guy who can help them win now rather than just add 2 more rookies. I don't think the party should get younger this offseason.
I mean, I think the play then is, can you trade back and get a future first round pick or future asset? Or like you said, like I think about, I guess the Grizzlies was a team I saw. Good morning, Cheryl. Always appreciate when you can join us. Connect and Matas. Like, that's it. That's 2 wings. One of those, a 22, 23-year-old who at the very least can probably come in and immediately space the floor. And then Matas is going to take a little bit more time. And, so I was thinking about the Grizzlies because that conversation happened the other day. They have a bunch of wings right now. Like, how is that room going to shake out? The Thunder, like, the guy I would love to shake away from the Thunder is Isaiah Joe. I don't think you're going to do that because he's so good. But, like, they're not in a cap situation where I think it would matter for them. But, like, they're going to get there, right? Like, you're going to have to pay Jalen Williams. You're going to have to pay Chet Holmgren eventually. Like, all these guys, like, maybe before they have to pay Isaiah Joe big bucks, maybe you could shake him away. I don't think that's going to happen, but I think that's right, Omari. Like, somebody like that makes more sense than just 2 of these. It's always fun to talk about bringing in 2 more, but then again, you got to find minutes for them on a team that already has a bunch of young guys. So great question from Afra. And I think trading this because of the draft is going to be a conversation that comes up a lot as we get closer, just because of, the names at the top and people not being crazy excited, Wes.
So for this next one, we actually kind of got a twofer. One was submitted beforehand. This is from Matt Haggerty. And as well, Aruna mentioned very much the same thing here in the live chat. So, Omari, if the Pistons want to make a big trade this offseason, who are some players that might become available later on here as, teams make their playoff runs?
it's going to be players, and we talked about this on the pod, but just with the new cap rules, it's going to be teams that are looking to save money and not be deeply into luxury tax for a team that's not winning. I know one player that is sort of right in that cross section of on a good team, really expensive. Can they afford to keep him? Is Karl Anthony Towns.
Yeah.
Is, but the Pistons actually go as far as to make a swing for that type of guy, especially when they don't have a first round pick they can trade before, I think it's 2028 now. I don't know if they just have the package that Minnesota would even be interested in. Like, I look at Detroit's roster and, their decision is we're going to build around Anthony Edwards and Rudy Gobert, who on Detroit's roster helps them get closer. If you're trading Karl Anthony Towns, look at it and it's like, I don't really know, cause just given that this team obviously has struggled and you probably only have a handful of guys on this current roster who could go to a contender and help immediately. And that's who are those guys on this team, right? Cade, Fontecchio, maybe a guy like Grimes, and he could get healthy and start knocking down threes again, but there just aren't a lot of proven role players on this team who are slated to come back next season, and they have all this money they have to spend. So maybe if Minnesota's just cool, just, hey, we're going to, just get off this money and we don't necessarily need to maximize the return. The Pistons, of course, could absorb that salary without the cap they have, and that makes more sense. But, again, I think their lack of a first-round pick, a recent first-round pick that they can trade will limit them in a lot of discussions. But some of that, we'll just have to wait and see how it shakes out in the playoffs. Like, you have a team like, if the Clippers lose in the first round, like, what do they do, right? If, Boston comes up short, like, let's say they fall in round 2 after the season that they've had, like, what do they do, right? You have all these teams with all this salary who would be forced to make, some pretty big decisions. So that's what I'm looking at. But again, I think a lot of that just comes down to actually losing, right? I think it's tough to say who that player would be before we actually get into the playoffs. But I think Karl Anthony Towns is probably the most notable example of a guy who kind of fits that mold.
Well, and the thing you have to remember with the Wolves is, and I listen, like, this isn't my own thoughts or research, but listen to a pod the other day. Like, I think they said in the history of the organization, they've spent like $25 million in luxury tax or whatever. And right now there's something crazy over that, if they bring guys back. And so, like, with the Wolves, it's truly like, if they don't make a Western Conference Finals or an NBA Finals, they're going to have to really make a decision here on what this looks like moving forward. And it really might be a money decision. And obviously we all know the ownership thing and that fell through and whatever's going on there. Like, I know it sounds crazy to salary dump Karl Anthony Towns, but they may almost have to. Like, they might be in a tough spot because of that, where it's simply a money decision. Like, what I kind of want, I'd rather just have Naz Reid. Like, I would rather just trade for Naz Reid and bring him in and let them keep Towns and figure that out. And, all of that. Aruna asked about Brandon Ingram. I think that's a real interesting fit in terms of he's at the position. He is 26. That's definitely not too old, like, at all. The one thing to note is he'll only have one more year on his contract. So that's one thing I want to be careful of whenever we talk about these guys. And that's the thing with Towns. Towns is about to get crazy expensive. Eventually, you're going to have to pay guys. We're moving it. Well, even though they suck, we're moving into that stage of things. If you want to keep Cade Cunningham, they're moving into the stage of either you go for it a little bit or you might as well restart again, because Cade's getting to that point, hopefully some of these other guys as well. But I want to make sure there's the flexibility to build out the roster around these guys, right? I don't want to trade for Brandon Ingram knowing I have to pay him $50 million a year, give Cade his rookie extension, and then we can't build out the roster any other way. You're going to lose a draft pick at some point in the next few years. Hopefully, I say hopefully because then that means the team's actually winning some games. And so I want to make sure there's flexibility with that stuff. A few other teams, and then we can go to break and get some of the other questions. What happens with the Cavs in the playoffs, right? I don't know, like, if Donovan Mitchell is a guy, like, not all these guys are fits necessarily for the Pistons, but that's an interesting team to watch in the playoffs. The Atlanta Hawks are a team that I think eventually are going to do something. We've talked about the Chicago Bulls at length. What do the Brooklyn Nets do with the talent on their roster that they do have that doesn't seem to fit? There's some guys that could be interesting there. And the Pelicans in general. Another team, the last one I'll mention, is the Sacramento Kings. Like, what happens if their playoffs don't go the way they want? I know I didn't mention specific players, but those are some teams in playoff situations where if it doesn't go well, could all of a sudden some things start to happen. and the Pistons come in and make a move. So let's go to a break. When we come back, Omari, we'll get right back to Wes and start maybe going through these a little quicker. I know both of us have had a lot to say on the first few.
All right, we are back with segment 2, and we have a lot of questions to get through. And I don't know if we're going to get through all of them, so I will give it back to Wes, and we're going to try to speed through these a little bit quicker so we
I'll
can
go faster.
accommodate everybody.
Okay, sounds good. So this next one is from Coney Snow on Twitter. Says, of the G League talent that the Pistons have had play this season, so that being Amude, Tosan, Buddy, which one of those is most likely to make the roster next season?
I would say Amude, just because he's the most proven of those guys. Like, he kind of moved on from the two-way situation and got a standard contract. And I think just skill-wise, he's probably the best shooter and defender of the three if you're taking both into account. So I think he's actually been pretty good defensively. And
Agreed.
he's knocked down some threes, but he's not the type of volume shooter that they is. So I would think today, with that, like, I think the Pistons are coming to this offseason, like, we need to upgrade at all costs. So I don't know if any of those guys are like top of list necessarily, but Umide for sure is the most proven of the three. 6'6" wing, he's exactly what they need. For me, it would pretty clearly be him if you're picking one of the three.
Yeah, I think that was my answer as well. Tosan, I always put in my notes, like, I think defensively, I really like what he does. He tries to do some stuff off the bounce. It's not always fruitful. He made some shots in the last game, I believe it was. I think he made 2 threes maybe. It's just such low volume. I mean, if you go look at the percentage right now, you'd be like, what are you guys talking about? I think he's over 40% from 3, but it's like 1 a game. And so, like, if you told me he was really going to improve the jumper, then I would be a little more interested. What you said there, though, is, I mean, I get caught up in this, right? Like, we get caught up in these guys. I think Keith Black Trudeau brought it up, like all of the different names of, Eugene Omarui and the little point, Carson Edwards, and all of these different guys that we kind of get excited about. And it's like, at the end of the day, most of them probably aren't going to stick. And we probably shouldn't want them to stick because you want this talent to increase and be better 11 through 15. Like, you almost want these 3 guys back on 2 ways, right? Like, you feel pretty good if Amude and Tosan are your 2-way guys, and Buddy, who has gotten better, can space the floor, and you're only using them in break glass situations. I will say it does make me feel like I wish we could win on the margins one time. I wish, Troy could find one diamond in the rough, whether it's a 2nd-round pick, undrafted free agent. You pick someone up off a 2-way, like one guy, not to be a starter, guys, but just to come in and actually contribute. I still don't know that we've seen that guy, but yeah, I would say Amude if I had to pick one. So Wes, give your answer on that, and then let's get to the next question.
Yeah, I think it's Amude, but I was kind of curious about this next question because Jonathan Strong on Twitter was inspired by that Keith Black Trudeau tweet that you just mentioned. So he wanted to ask which of those late season guys that Troy Weaver has brought in, which was the worst, which was the best going over, the past 4 years.
Omari, so Keith Black Trudeau, I don't know if you saw it, he put out like Tyler Cook, Carson Edwards, Eugene Omarui, and then Metu this season, which Metu just came off a really nice game. Like, I don't know that I don't think that any of them are the worst. Like, I don't know what the bad situation is, but I don't know that any of them are the best either. Like, to me, they've all been essentially ended up as indifferent. Now, you may be able to throw names at me that says, like, we should have brought in this guy. Look what he ended up doing for this team. Like, that's where it isn't indifferent, right? Is there may have been an option out there to bring in somebody else on a 2-way or a end of the season contract, keep them around, and they did become rotation guys. So none of them have hit. I guess the question then would be is what are the names of the guys they missed out on that they could have kept around a little bit long term to help out this team?
Yeah, that's kind of where I was. It's kind of tough to say which one is the most pointless because, like, at this point in the season, they are just all here to just fill spots because you lost guys to injury. So in the majority of situations, most of those guys are just not necessarily going to be guys who stick beyond that 10-day or in the season or whatever it is. Like, I know folks remember Tyler Cook a couple of years ago. Like, he came in a little bit of an undersized big, but he came in good energy, good athleticism. But then his season ends and you look at it long term, like, how do these guys fit? A lot of times they don't. They just came in to show what they can do, audition a bit, and fill in a gap for a team that had a lot of injuries and just needed some bodies. So, it's tough because, like, from like a fan and from like a media standpoint, it's like, all this stuff has meaning, right? Like, you want to talk about this stuff as though it matters in the grand scheme. Now, I want to say it doesn't matter, but just in the vast majority of cases, a lot of these, signings you make at the end of the year don't really amount to much. And that's just the nature of signing a guy in April or late March. Like, they're guys who are still trying to prove that they can make a difference in the league. So best or worst, it's kind of tough. Like, I don't think there's a worst. I think they're sort of all in the same tier. And the best would be a guy who actually proved that he could come back. And we haven't really seen that either. So to me, they're just all in that same tier of just late season signing. But I agree with Bryce from the standpoint of they just need a guy who is a diamond in the rough, who actually comes back. And it's like, we have to prioritize this guy at all costs. Like, they haven't had that yet. And that's kind of what they've been looking for.
So YouTube user brought this up in the comment section. He's mentioning that the Pistons have been using the two-way spots on like low ceiling but high floor guys. And I kind of wanted to spin that into a question for you both. Like, what would your approach be with those two-way spots? Would you want just the high ceiling, but maybe it's a lottery ticket, or would you want maybe more of a sure thing with those roster spots?
Yeah, I know I just said that like Amude, Tosan, those guys back on two ways next year. Like, I'm going to contradict myself because I kind of was thinking it as I was saying that, because I do think those guys have earned some spot around the league. But I kind of agree with YouTube user here. I think if I really thought about it, I'd rather bring back like one of those guys and then have those other, like, I would recycle those other two spots every year. I would find the most upside. You have to consider personalities, Omari, and you don't want to just be bringing in just anybody into the building or whatever. But yeah, like just guys that could actually click and have high enough upside to really do something, and I'm with YouTube user there. I would use two of those on those type of players, like just, I'm not saying starter level players, but really there is a ceiling there. Even if it's only 5% ceiling and the 95% is they're not NBA players at all, like eventually one of those guys clicks. So I would have one like high floor, low ceiling, and then I would use the other two spots for those higher ceiling guys that may actually end up in a rotation.
Yeah, this is another one I'm struggling with a bit, just because a lot of times when you get to guys who are undrafted, none of them are necessarily high upside guys. If they were, they probably would have been drafted and not in a two-way situation. I just think the reality is that once you get to that tier of player, a lot of it is just like a crapshoot. If they're a too high upside guy, like let's say like a GG Jackson from Memphis, right? It would be great to sign a guy who's young and has upside, right? But those guys tend to be draft picks. They're not guys that you're signing at the end of the year because teams see that potential. So more often it's guys who are on their second or third stop and just hadn't latched on anywhere else. And you're just seeing if there's anything else there, which, 99 times out of 100, the guy just kind of is where they are, right? If it doesn't work out at the first couple stops and now you're 24, 25 in most instances, that's just kind of where you are in your career. And you don't usually see those guys blow up later on. So you could argue they could go one way or another. I know a lot of people were upset about them signing Buddy last season, but Buddy came back this year and he's been one of the better guys on the Cruise, and he's shot the ball really, really well, right? I think people would have called him low upside probably last season, but he came back this year and he's improved his game, and he's been probably one of the better two-way players they've had, to be honest. So the reality is that you just really don't know. The guys come in and they have a certain perception or reputation, but generally, if it's truly a high upside guy, like you're going to be on a roster somewhere already. So in my mind, it's just more stuff.
Like GG went 45, so like you would have had to make a move to go get that pick, right? Like you would have had to trade something to go get it and just say, like, we're going to target GG Jackson and we're going to bring him on, put him on a two-way. And obviously so far that's worked out good for Memphis.
Yeah, and YouTube user mentions that Buddy's a terrible defender. And it's like, typically a guy is going to have some sort of flaw that prevents them from truly being a daily rotation player. With Tosan, it was just this lack of a jumper coming in, right? Like, it's always going to be something. So I just think when it comes to this tier of player, it's just, reality is that it's just a crapshoot, right? If it's a guy that truly has high upside, then you're probably going to draft him. And, that's just kind of how it goes.
Well, I mean, we just talked about it with the Amude and Tosan. Yeah. Like, I mean, you could make an argument that Tosan fits into this. Like, he's a good defender, has an NBA body. Can he develop a jumper? If he doesn't, he's never going to be an NBA player. If he does, all of a sudden you could say, hey, there was a higher ceiling for him there. If he's able, like every one of these guys are going to have to develop something, and you're just banking on, can they develop that? Now, maybe we disagree on what you want to bet on, right? Like with Buddy, he can space the floor. Like he's probably an NBA level floor spacer. Are you going to bet on Buddy Boeheim actually getting more athletic and stronger and all of those things to become a competent enough defender? I don't know. So that's really, it's like, what are you betting on? What does your organization feel like they can develop? So, all right, Wes, what do we got next?
All right, this one is from Brian. Bryce, go to you first. Is Jaden Ivey on the same timeline as Cade Cunningham? And if not, can he catch up?
Listen, you guys know how I feel about Jaden Ivey. Listen, I also go read my game notes. Like, I criticize Jaden Ivey just as much as anybody else. Like, I want to be, clear with that. I thought the last couple of games, his first half process has been good and his second half process has been bad. He had some really bad defensive possessions on on Monday night. Listen, I still believe in this. For me, I think Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey can work because I actually think Jaden Ivey can play off the ball. Yes, he has to be able to catch and shoot better than what he's done so far, but I think he can attack closeouts. Watch some of his best plays. It's cutting off Cade drives. It's coming off pin downs and weak side staggers and getting out in transition. I think they can work together. I know most people don't. That's fine. I don't think that Monty believes he may believe in Jaden Ivey. I don't think Jaden Ivey is the prototypical off-ball guard that Monty Williams wants. I'm not even sure Cade Cunningham sees Jaden Ivey as the ideal backcourt running mate for him. So for that reason, I don't think this ends up being the backcourt that moves for the next few years. And I was thinking about this morning, Omari. They moved on from Saddiq Bey, not the year, but the year before he was going to become that restricted free agent on his rookie deal. That's coming up for Jaden Ivey and Jalen Duren. So I'm not saying this offseason, but if they do feel the way I think they feel about Jaden Ivey, I think it could happen as soon as the upcoming deadline, because that's whenever they went ahead and moved on from Saddiq Bey, whenever they didn't want to pay him what they thought he was going to ask. And real quick shout out to Saddiq Bey. I hope he's recovering well. Just awful timing for his knee injury. So just quick shout out there. But those are my thoughts on Cade and Ivey, Omari.
Yeah, no, obviously awful timing for Saddiq to deal with the torn ACL. So, of course, hope he makes the full recovery. No, I don't think Ivey's in the same timeline as Cade. And I don't know if he's ever been. He's always been more of a guy if he hits his higher outcome, then he's a guy who could fit with Cade. But I know we talked about this a lot leading up to that draft. And, we've had debates throughout the season. Yeah. It's just certain skills Ivey has to develop that he has not done with consistency that are going to have to come for him to really be the fit next to Cade that the team needs. And that's going to be defense, and that's going to be outside shooting. And he shot the ball pretty well to start. He's been in a pretty bad shooting slump since All-Star weekend. He's had good stretches of defense. I think the defense has kind of slipped in the last month or so. So I guess as far as saying timeline, those guys are only a draft apart. So in that standpoint, they are. But Cade was a number one pick. He came in. You were pretty certain he's going to be, at the very least, a pretty good starter for you in this past season. Or I guess this current season, the efficiency's been there and he's been a lot better. So that's more of a number one pick timeline. Ivey was always more of a project, I think, to start. And on his really good nights, it's this is absolutely a guy you would have been around next to Cade, but he's going to have to really knock down shots. He's going to have to really lock in on defense. And there's other stuff he adds, so that's good. Of course, his downhill pressure is, really useful. But, just to fit next to Cade, I just think there's a very narrow set of skills you have to at least be proficient at. And that's going to be his playing skill going forward is, I think, defense and outside shooting.
Yep. All right, Wes, what do we got next?
Well, let's stick with the Jaden Ivey conversation for a minute. We got this question from Derek Brown on Twitter. It says, would you trade Jaden Ivey and Marcus Sasser for Alex Caruso and Zach LaVine in Chicago? So I don't know about that trade specifically, but, maybe talk just about Jaden Ivey and Zach LaVine, because that brings up something from earlier on this season.
Yeah, I'm avoiding the Zach LaVine. I don't know what his injuries are, right? This was a question back at the deadline when this was the hot. And then now he's been injured again. So people said it back then. People are going to say it now. There's a contract. Here's what I will say. I think the archetype of Zach LaVine makes a lot of sense next to Cade Cunningham. That's what I will say. I think that's the idea of what you're looking for, ideally for an off-ball running mate with Cade Cunningham based off what we've seen from Cade. And then Alex Caruso is Alex Caruso. At the end of the day, this would be, and then Alex Caruso is really good. And again, fits exactly what this team would need in terms of spaces the floor a little bit. One of the best perimeter defenses and defenders in the NBA, all of that. So value otherwise, Alec, you get somebody like that, and then the archetype of Zach LaVine, sure, that's what you're looking for. There's part of me that would be interested to see Jaden Ivey getting traded, because I would love to see what his value in the NBA is. Like, I have no idea what Jaden Ivey's value would be around the league. Like, could he bring in something that was a good haul? But I just don't. I think it's so hard to discuss Zach LaVine right now, Omari, because we have no idea what the medicals would say. And if a team, is he a neutral asset? Is he a negative asset because of that and the contract? Like, we have no idea. And how do the Bulls view him? Like, are they willing to get rid of him as a negative asset? So it's such a hard conversation around LaVine.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that Caruso and LaVine would be the two best players in that deal. So to me, Chicago's willingness to do it would be just the extent that they don't think they can salvage the LaVine situation because of injuries or because of salary or this and that. But to me, if for that, in that deal, they would probably be settling just because they're giving up, a bona fide proven scorer and one of the best all around guards in the league, and Caruso, for two guys who have not played on that level. So with the Pistons do that trade, like I think they probably would, to be honest, even with the risk with LaVine, because they need to speed things up. I don't know if Chicago does that trade. If I'm Chicago, I'm like, I probably need at least a pick or something else.
I don't think Ivey and Sasser make a ton of sense with, like, if they're getting rid of Caruso and LaVine, they're building around at least Kobe White. And then, like, do Kobe and Jaden Ivey and Marcus Sasser all make sense? The Ayo Dosunmu is quietly, I guess, probably like has been really good here late in the year. So, like, how do you prioritize all of that backcourt and all of those guys? I would think they would be, wanting some more. Yet to me, I mean, like I said, this is almost LaVine as a negative asset, which I know some people consider LaVine to be a negative asset. Like, I get it. So, but would you agree that LaVine is the archetype that makes the most sense off of Cade? Like, I feel like true, like, bucket getter, high volume 3-point shooter. I feel like Cade would love having that guy next to him. I'm not saying it has to be LaVine. I'm just saying that, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, he's athletic. He could shoot, get to the rim. Like, he's a really good all around scorer. The ball still in Cade's hands. So I think LaVine can play off of Cade really, really well. So, the archetype of that player, I think, makes perfect sense. So you got another guy, Caruso, who can really, really defend. Like, that's exactly what you need in the backcourt. Like, if I had to pick a shorter player to pair with Cade, it would be a guy exactly like Alex Caruso. Sure. Who can take on a tougher defensive assignment, can move the ball. Like, that's perfect. So, kind of like I said earlier, I think for Detroit, that's, a pretty cleanly won trade, even with the injury risk for LaVine, just because it checks so many boxes for them. If LaVine doesn't work out, guess what? You got Caruso, so you still got a really good player out of that deal. If you're in Chicago, I don't know if they necessarily get the same thing. They got to bank on something better than happening. So I think Chicago would need a bit more for that trade to really make sense from Detroit's side.
All right, let's get to one more. We'll go to break, and then we'll just go rapid fire after the break. But let's get to one more here before that.
All right, quick draft one here. That is from Narobi on Twitter. It says, how do you feel about Kyle Filipowski?
I like Kyle Filipowski's game. I think just you look at a guy like Gallinari or like Mike Muscala, with those guys are able to come in. You have a guy in Filipowski who can really, like, he can pass it, solid rebounder. He's shooting like 35% from three, like all around pretty good scorer. That's like, to me, he is not necessarily maybe what this team needs from a starting big, if that makes sense, just because they probably need a guy who's a bit more defensively capable. But beyond that, like, you look at Mike Muscala's like plus minus numbers in Detroit, and it's like, man, like a first-basing five, like, absolutely popped in Monty's offense and really kind of brought things to life. And it probably wasn't going to stay. The plus minus wasn't going to be that extreme probably over the course of the whole season, but it just shows how much value a player like that could add. So, I like Kyle Filipowski. I think he fits Detroit, just because it's their biggest priority in the front court. It's probably a guy who can defend. I don't know if he's a priority there, but offensively, I think he's a perfect fit.
Yeah, I like him off the bench. Right now, I have Filipowski kind of late lottery in that range. Like, I don't think he's going to move up by my board at all. He can move down my board a little bit. If anything, I'm still, how good is the defense? How much can he move? And how skilled is he? Because I think he's skilled. Like, the idea of Filipowski is a 7-footer with decent movement. He'll be neutral defensively, but is really skilled. 35% from three on 3 attempts. Even the free throw percentage for his career, 72%. He can pass the ball. But again, it's not like the actual production doesn't quite meet the eye test. Like I've watched a lot of games where I've just gone, man, I'm just going to buy this because it looks really good. So if you kind of buy the skill set, he's really intriguing. This would only happen in a trade back scenario that we talked about earlier, though. Like to me, Filipowski should not be in the discussion of where the Pistons could land in the draft. It would only be if they traded back or, whatever, to get 2 picks or traded back to get a player in a later lottery pick or mid first round pick. But yeah, he would be like an off the bench big. I don't know that Filipowski is your starting 5-man because of the defensive, like he's just not going to be an anchor of the defense type of big man at the 5 position. So let's go to a short break, Omari. When we come back, we'll send it right back to Wes and I'll shorten my answers and we'll try to get through as many as we can here.
All right, we're back with segment 3. We've got about 18-ish minutes left, and we're just going to go rapid fire. So go ahead and lead us off, Wes.
Well, this one might not be a fantastic one for rapid fire, but it was a great question, so I wanted to bring it up from Data-Driven Pistons fan. Just saying in general, have you noticed if the Pistons are running different sets and actions based on which 2-guard they have on the floor? So those 2 guards being, Ivey, Fournier, to a lesser extent, Mude before he got hurt, those types of players.
I haven't. I feel like they run a lot of the same stuff. The one thing I will say, I like some of the ATO stuff that Monty Williams, after timeout, start a game stuff Monty Williams runs. I had my notes in my very last game that he ran a real interesting action. So that's one thing I know Monty has taken a lot of heat. I like some of the set actions he run. I'm interested to see as this roster turns over next season, Omari, if we see more of that 0.5 offense. And it seems like Cade pounds the ball a lot. Sasser gets in, pounds the ball a lot. I'm interested if we get a little more into the 0.5 stuff next year. But no, I guess to answer his or her question specifically, I don't notice a difference with who's on the floor and kind of what they're doing.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Like, I thought it was really glaring when, Quentin Grimes came in and he's like probably dribbling a lot more than you would expect, right? And they talk about 0.5 all season. They just are not really stuck to that with any consistency. And on paper, Grimes is like the perfect guy for that because he's just catch and shoot, or cut, or like he's a good cutter or driver or whatever. And when you see him taking 3-4 dribbles, it's like I don't really know what's going on here. That's not how I thought they would use Quentin Grimes. So no, I haven't really noticed that, and I think that's an area of growth over the offseason for the coaching staff, is to just maybe dial into guys' strengths and weaknesses a bit more. And if you have a guy like Grimes, then obviously, you probably want to stick him in the corner, right? Like how they were sticking Ivy in the corner. Like you want to, so there's probably more optimization you could do as far as that.
Yeah, the only player I want to see pounding the ball for that many dribbles is Cade Cunningham. Everybody else should be 1-2 dribbles, and you're either downhill, shooting, or passing the ball. And that includes Jaden Ivey for me. And honestly, that includes Marcus Sasser as well. So that's where I'm at with kind of the offense.
All right, this next one here, this is from Koo, and it kind of builds off what he was talking about when he joined our show just a couple weeks ago.
You guys go listen to that if you haven't.
Yeah.
Great stuff from Koo.
Yeah. But so this is his question. This is from Twitter. He says that the Pistons prioritize Cade Cunningham and Asar Thompson. Does it make sense for them to try and grab a stretch 5 as the starting 5 instead of a guy like Jalen Duren?
I mean, I would say yes. I don't think it's a have to, though. Like, let's just work in the world where Asar doesn't become a floor spacer, right? Like, I think that's fair to assume that that's a possibility. If you have Cade and then 2 other guys that can really stretch the floor at the 2 and the 3 or the 2 and the 4, depending on where you plug Asar into, I think you can get by with Asar and a non-shooting big as long as that non-shooting big is really good defensively. So I think you can get away with that because of Asar's passing, what he's able to do, hopefully rim pressure wise as he tightens his handle, all of those things. Ideally, though, and like this is just what I believe in general, Omari, I'm sold on the stretch big rim protector. Like you give me that guy, I think it just changes the whole dynamic of your team offensively and defensively, unless it's Jokic, right? Like if he can be the hub of your offense, which the Pistons aren't going to do because Cade is the hub of the offense. So you don't even need to go after it. If there's a Jokic type of player, there's no Jokic, but you know what I mean? Like you don't need Alperen Şengün, I guess is my point. You need a Chet Holmgren archetype of player, Victor's a Holden level, beyond that. But you know what I mean? That's what I would look for. Stretch 5. But if that stretch 5 doesn't protect the rim, then you better be elite at 2, 3, and 4 defensively. So not just Asar, but then those other two guys better be elite on the perimeter, Omari.
No, absolutely. I think every team kind of wants those guys who can like hit shots and defend from the 5. But you look at the number of guys who actually do that around the league, like just non-superstar guys, right? Like you have Jaren Jackson Jr., Chet Holmgren, Miles Turner, but it's just not a lot of those guys. Brook Lopez, but there's not really a lot of those guys. So I think especially if you have a star in the starting lineup, you're giving up something on offense or defense if he's like your quote unquote 4 in that lineup, because, if it's a big that can shoot, more often than not, they're probably not going to give you a lot of defense, right? So you're going to have to really beef up your perimeter defense and, have guys who can just stop the penetration to begin with, make the big job easier. Or if it's a big that's defensively good, you have 2 non-shooters up there. When now off of Cade, you probably need 2 elite shooters at the 2 and the 3 at that point. So it's kind of just like a pick your poison to me, I guess. Like if you can get that like Jackson or Holmgren type guy, then that solves pretty much all your issues, and you can just play Asar wherever you want at that point. And that's like the ideal scenario. The reality is that those guys are really hard to find. They're hard to trade for. Teams are just not going to give those guys up. So if you're not drafting a guy like that, yeah, you're probably going to have to pick one or the other. And I think that's tough. But in that scenario, maybe I would still lean toward the stretch 5 just so that your offense can really pop. And, you have a star on the floor. If Cade can make a leap defensively and you get another good defender in there like Fontecchio, you might be able to survive. So that's kind of where I lean. I would lean toward the stretch 5, but ideally, one way or another, you're just getting a big that can do both, and then you don't have to make those tough decisions.
Yeah, I like the idea of a stretch 5 because I think that not only does it open up Cade, I think if you're in this scenario, you're prioritizing Asar. Remember, right? Like, so that kind of assume that means you've either traded Ivy, moved him to the bench, same with Duren, whatever. I think to maximize Asar, you want to give him floor spacing as well. Like Asar at his best is going to be in an open space floor. So offensively, it's best for Cade. It's best for Asar. And then I think what you just have to say is, Asar, you're the anchor of our defense. Now, what's the high end upside of a wing / forward being the best defender on your team? I don't know. Like, I don't know the history of that, but if your 5-man can stretch the floor and be neutral defensively, and then you put a couple other good floor spacers and good perimeter defenders with that, I can live with. Like, it's like, okay, let's put Kyle Filipowski at the 5, right? Like 3 years from now, stretches the floor, neutral defender. You put 2 other good defenders there. They can space the floor. Let Cade and Asar go to work. Like, I can see that. I will say real quick, Wes, and then we'll get to the next one. This is why I love Alex Sarr so much, is he has the potential to space the floor. And I know some people don't believe in it at all. Some people don't believe it in like the very near future. He's shown enough flashes skill-wise to believe there's a chance to go along with the defense. And that's why I have him number 1 on my overall board, is that archetype is just so valuable. So, all right, next one.
Well, this is a somewhat related question. This is from Igor Santos on Twitter. He asks, has the question, can Cade, Ivy, Asar, and Duren play together, actually been answered this season? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, not this version of those. Okay. Yeah, you think it's been answered. So what's the answer, though?
I think the answer is like they fit awkwardly.
Yeah, agreed.
And some of those guys would just have to, just improve their games for it to really work.
Yep.
But I think with Asar and Duren, you have 2 non-shooters, and on top of that, Duren's not quite the defender you need him to be. So you're just always going to be giving something up. Like, those guys can out-rebound probably most front courts for sure, but you're giving a lot up. And we just talked about Ivy, so we don't need to go through that. But at this stage in their development, like, I don't know if those guys together like gel in the way that you would want a 4-man unit to gel. So I think that's probably a big point of the offseason, and just figuring out like which of these guys are the perfect fit. And then from there, if you don't necessarily think a guy will develop this skill or the other, like who you get at free agency that can fill those gaps.
Yeah, I agree. I think the answer right now is no. Under their current abilities and skills, no. And in fairness, you can project Jaden Ivey probably as a 33% three-point shooter, and Asar, like, who knows? And Duren, a lot of the skills I was hoping he would have and develop haven't shown up. He's still young. All of these guys are young, and so that's why you can't say, like, no, it can never happen. Real quickly, I don't think you always have to play them together. Like we throw around the core four, like they have to be starters. And Laz probably brings up a good point. Like, let's stop calling them the core four. They don't need to be the core four. If you tell me like Ivey ends up being a sixth man off the bench, I don't know the history of the number 5 overall pick doing that for the team that drafted him. Maybe that's not realistic, but I don't think they have to play together to provide value to the organization. So I want to throw that in there as well. I do want to get quicker here, so I'll leave it there and we can go to the next one.
Okay, so this next one is also talking about development. I thought it was a pretty good question. So this is from Kian Harris on Twitter. But just ask, in general, when you guys are talking about player development, when do you say that a guy just, quote, is who he is, or maybe still even has another evolution to go on his game? Bryce, you first.
Yeah, this is hard. This is a great question. I don't think we can honestly answer this unless we're around the players. Like at the end of the day, we sit here and I was thinking about this morning, guys. Like I'm not here to like tell anybody that I don't know any more about basketball than anybody else. I'm just here because somebody gave me a platform and a microphone to talk basketball. And on this podcast, it happens to be the Pistons. And I enjoy doing it, whether it's 6:30 in the morning or 6:30 at night or whatever. So we don't have all the answers. Like, I think there's more development with Jaden Ivey. I don't think he is who he is, but I don't work with Jaden Ivey. I have no idea what Jaden Ivey's actual mentality is or thoughts on his role or how hard he's working on his jump shot or how he's seeing I've never watched film with Jaden Ivey. There's a few players I know a little bit better because of some stuff I do that I can tell you like how much more development there is or there isn't. If we're not actually in there working with them, we have no idea where that development's going to start. We don't know how they tick and what their mindset is. The best we can do is like give them some room. I guess to answer in general, once a guy gets through his first 3 or 4 years, I feel like I have an idea at least of the trajectory or what he's going to be. Like, I feel like that I'm closer to like, hey, he's had 4 years. Now there's nuance here, Omari, injuries, team context, like all of those things. But I'd say once they get through their rookie deal, 4 years in the league, I feel like it, but Brook Lopez would have, proved me wrong in that situation because all of a sudden he starts banging threes and becomes crazy valuable. So you have to be there with him to really know Omari.
Yeah, no doubt. My response to that would be, I think it just depends a lot of it on the particular player, like their reputation. Some guys' reputations is like first in the gym, first out. Some guys don't have that reputation. I think a lot of it is like what they need to improve in. If you have a guy that's pretty much complete outside of the jumper, then that's like one deal, right? If it's a guy that, it depends on what you need to develop. I think some skills are like either you have it or you don't to some extent.
If they're capped athletically with what they can be, that's different.
So it's just, to me, it really is case by case, and it just comes down to that player's unique mix of skills, their athleticism, their age, and kind of what you know about them as people and as workers and their reputation as far as that. But even then, you never really know, even with that, right? Like sometimes guys come out and they show skill that you didn't expect. I don't know if anybody saw Kobe White having the season he's had this season, right? So sometimes people surprise you. So it really is case by case. I wish I had a better answer for that, but I think there's always a degree of uncertainty with any player. And I think a lot of it just comes down to who they are and their age and a lot of other intangible stuff that you can't really track that accurately, right? Sometimes guys surprise you, in good ways and bad.
All right, Wes. Omari, let's 20 seconds. We got to hold each other to 20 seconds. Right. We're accountability partners here. Yes. True rapid fire after 30 minutes of saying rapid fire.
We need like a bell, something like that.
We need a bell. Or the Oscar music when you guys are going too long, right? This next one's a good one for it. This is a good one for it because we did touch on this, I think, a couple of weeks ago. But what is the % chance that you think Troy Weaver comes back next year? This is from Big Dog Pistons on Twitter.
100% he runs the offseason. 51% he's here through the regular season.
Yeah, I struggle with percentages because it's like, the answer is either like he'll be back or he won't, right? Like I could say, I think it's 40 or 60 or whatever, but at the end of the day, it doesn't mean anything. I'll just say I would not be surprised to see Troy, man, the entire offseason. He survived 28 straight. I think his deadline moves, were pretty good. And, I think the difference now is that I don't want to say like a mandate, but I will say that there is an awareness from ownership and all the people involved that like the way we have run this team has not worked, period. We've taken too many swings on guys I haven't played. Like, we've made mistakes, right? So, I could see Trey manning the offseason, but I could see it being under the lens of these certain things need to happen now, and we can't do it the same way. And that's kind of where I'm at now.
Okay, so sticking with Troy Weaver, this one's kind of an interesting one. Just thinking back in hindsight from Erwin Raphael, do you think that falling to the 5th pick in the 2022 draft was a bit of a derailment for Troy Weaver's vision for this roster? And obviously that would be missing out on players like Paolo Banchero, Chet Holmgren, Jabari Smith Jr., and Keegan Murray.
I mean, derailment almost means like there was no other path to make it work. So I don't think that that's fair. Like, I think that's actually letting the front office off the hook in a sense. Yes, Chet would make more sense on this roster. Keegan Murray would make plenty of sense on this roster. I don't think Paolo would make any sense on this roster with Cade. I don't think I like that as much. It's based off what I see, what Cade wants to be. But yeah, I mean, would this roster make more sense with those guys on it instead of Jaden Ivey? Sure. Like, so in that sense, yes. I don't think that should be an excuse for the roster still not being as good as what it is.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm at too. Did it hurt you to fall to 5 in a draft where the top 4 guys were pretty much, the clear top 4 in the draft? And obviously Jalen Williams went 12th, and he was, I guess, the exception to that. Like, I think it hurts, but I think along with that, you had 3 first-round picks in 2020. You got Cade, and then you've had enough picks at this point to where I just don't think one pick falling is necessarily a valid excuse in that scenario. Like, OKC had 12 and they got, probably a top 3 or 4 guy in this draft. So time still has to pass, right? Like, right year 2, you got the draft, and a lot of guys just haven't really done a whole lot yet. So I think it's too early to say that whether Ivy was like the perfect pick there or not, just because you look at guys that went after and nobody's really blown up. But no, I wouldn't say derailment. I would say the eyes are part of any rebuild. Like, a lot of teams get screwed and they figure it out, and you just have to figure it out. Like, that's kind of how it goes.
And Jaden Ivey's not an untalented basketball player. So like, there's
and Ivey's still good. Yeah.
I mean, so there's that as well. So
yeah.
Well, and I was just going to throw in too, if we remember back, Jaden Ivey was actually a surprise not to have been picked number 4. A lot of fans were pretty concerned about, Keegan Murray. And in hindsight, it looks like maybe that would have been better off. All right. So just a couple more. This is from Jared Gibbs. Does the offensive philosophy need to change? Omari, you first. What do you think?
I don't think so. I think they need players who can probably execute what Monty wants to do a bit better. I think if you look at the roster as a whole, has every player been maximized? Not necessarily. But I think with that, I don't think there's inherently anything broken with the offensive philosophy. I think a lot of it is just getting players who can actually space the floor and kind of complement Cade and give you more of what you need for the offense to function the way it needs to.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have the vision. This is Monty's coaching. This is Cade's team on the floor. Spend the offseason putting the guys around them that Cade wants and Monty wants. And I realize people may not like that because I know people aren't huge fans of Monty, and some people don't even believe in Cade. I think that's where the organization is. They are linked to Monty and Cade and those guys being successful. So Troy Weaver in the front office needs to give Monty the players he wants for his offensive system, and however that merges with the play style Cade Cunningham wants to play. I think that's the only path forward that makes sense. The margin for error there is what it is. I think that's the only way you can do it. And if you don't want to do it that way, fire the coach, trade Cade, and start over. And I don't think anybody has the stomach for that. So I think this is the path they're on.
All right, last question here. It's the one everyone wants to know. This is from Jance Jewel on Twitter. Guys, are we going to get a live show before the season ends?
So real quick here, I'm pretty sure she came to our last live show. So I told Wes and Omar, I was like, we have to answer this one because she showed up. She was there. I remember she got up, she asked a question, she stayed and hung around afterwards. And, we remember all the people that were there. We appreciate everybody so much. That was so much fun and such a stressful evening until people started showing up. Unfortunately, we will not get one before the season ends. Like I didn't make it to Detroit this year. Like, almost complete transparency. Like I do some stuff away from the media side where I had to travel this year, and it makes it hard. Like I'm traveling to other games and stuff, and I have to concede somewhere with my family, and my concession was like not making a trip to Detroit. Like the closest thing we're going to get in the next few months is going to be Vegas, and that's not really a live show. That's just me and Omari together in a hotel recording. So maybe something before next season, but yeah, it doesn't look like I'll make it to Detroit before at least next season. So I'm sorry, but man, I appreciate the question so much because it was a lot of fun and we did appreciate everybody who showed up, Amari.
Yeah, we will do one again someday. It is just logistically very tough to pull off. Just, like Bryce is being pulled in like 8 different directions. Of course, my schedule could be pretty busy as well. So we will figure out a time to do it. Like I would love to do one leading into next season or maybe early in the season, but that's just TBD. No promises. We will figure it out.
The cool thing is somebody cares enough and enjoyed it enough to ask. Like that makes me feel good. And that like puts a little bit of boost in like, okay, we need to make this happen. I love Detroit. Like YouTube, like I realize the season's been bad. I love every trip I've gone on to Detroit has been amazing. The people are awesome. The city's awesome. Omari gets me out, gets me cultured with different foods. We've, done some sightseeing. I love it. Like truly, I love Detroit, but it's been cold and rainy. Dude, it was a blizzard in Kansas. Like, we had a snow day last Monday because it blizzarded here. So, but yeah, man, I just haven't been able to make it work and I need to. So this is on me. This isn't on Omari. It's not on Wes. It's not on the Free Press. It's 100% on me and I hate it. So Wes, thank you so much for navigating this for us. We always appreciate when you come on. You deserve it so much. Your voice needs to be heard by the listeners and the viewers. So thank you. Listen, when you guys recording, Wes, is it tonight, Thursday, Friday? When is the pin down on next?
Tonight, Wednesday night, right after the Hawks game. So, if you're listening to this podcast on the podcast version, just check out the podcast feed. Yeah,
there you go. Amari, you made it to Atlanta. You're there.
Made it to Atlanta. Here.
Shout out Lauren Williams. I always think of the Hawks, think of Lauren. She's doing big things down there. So shout out Lauren. We should have brought her on to preview the Hawks game, but appreciate it, Koo. Thanks for tuning in. He says, good stuff, guys. All 3 of y'all. Thanks, Koo. We appreciate you guys. Go listen to Locked On Pistons as well. There's enough content, like left listeners for all of us. Plenty of people doing great Pistons content. So if you're not listening to Locked On Pistons with Koo, you should be daily. Like, shout out that dude for talking about the Detroit Pistons every day, Amari. And then you writing about him every day. So take it away, my guy. I got to go teach kids.
No doubt. Big thanks to Wes for leading us today. 2 more weeks in the season. I'm pretty much going to be on the road almost through the rest of the year. So hopefully no more travel issues like last night. And I will close this out. So big thanks, as always, to our audio producer, Robin Chan, our editor-in-chief, Nicole Avery Nichols, our executive producer, Anjanette Delgado, and our sports editor, Kirkland Crawford. And then big shout out again to Wes. And we'll talk to you all next week.